Good morning, and welcome to another episode of A Conversation with Father Orsi. I'm BC Cloutier, Chairman of the Board of Action for Light, and this is Father Michael Orsi. Nice to see you, Father.
And it is a rare and a great honor to be with you.
Oh, I thought you were going to say it was a rare and great honor to be seen.
You know what? It's not rare. I see a lot of you, but it is still a great honor.
Well, thank you, Father. God love you. Hey, I want to talk about...
Are you happy to see me? As happy
Absolutely.
As yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
Even when I call you up in the middle of the night?
Father, you are a very, very special person in my life.
I'm going to call you in the middle. You see, folks, what goes on in my head comes to me like in the middle of the... Well, for me, I mean, it's... Not the middle of the night. It's I get up kind of early in the morning, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and sometimes BC does when I call.
I usually sleep in until, like 3:30 or 4.
He's a late riser.
I wanted to talk today, Father, about the writing of the Gospels, which is, we don't think about it. We just think, well, there they are. But the progression of the Gospels began with oral tradition and then ultimately to written texts. Here's kind of the timeline, and then you can talk about this. Jesus' ministry was about the year 4 BC to 30 AD. Oral tradition, the 30s to the 60s AD. Earliest writings, which were Paul's letters and early hymns, was from the 50s AD onward. So we had the Epistle of St. Paul, which is...
They think the first Epistle of Paul was 45, 2 Thessalonians. They think that's the first one that we have.
And so that isn't a gospel, but it's
an epistle, it's a letter.
And then Mark's gospel was 65 to 70 AD.
Yeah, and again, that one, these dates are fluid, give or take, 5 or 10 years, right. either way. And then, some go, some say Mark was 55 that early. I don't think so. I think the earliest I would say is around 60.
Okay. Then Matthew and Luke, 70 to 90. John, 90 to 100 AD. So my point in reciting this factoid is these Gospels were not written at the same time. They were written at different times.
Right.
They were based on first-person accounts that were passed down. But what's interesting is, I've heard people compare the Bible to the game of telephone. Mm-hmm. Remember that as a kid?
Oh, yeah. But
somebody said something.
It got mongrelized, the message with the telephone. And you pass it around, by the time you get to the end, it's like, something nobody ever said.
So they say, well, how can you believe the Bible? Well, you can, because we have these 4 Gospels that were written by different people at different times, mm-hmm. that relate many of the same events in much the same manner.
Right.
And I think that sort of confirms that these stories are true.
Yeah. Let's take a look at how these Gospels were put together. And then I think it's also very important who recognized these Gospels as being authentic, okay? Because there are phony Gospels out there, okay? We'll talk a little bit about the phony Gospels.
Okay.
All right. As BC said, the Gospels are a product of a oral tradition. In other words, people told the stories of Jesus in these small communities where the faith was planted by people like St. Paul, okay? Timothy and Titus and all of these early evangelists went out to different towns, and they preached the gospel. The 12 apostles go out to all the world, tell the good news. They went to different parts of the known world at the time, and they preached the gospel. Now, after a while, people began to say 2 things. Number one, we better write this stuff down, because if we don't write it down, we're going to lose it, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is they said, well, we have to write this stuff down because it is a way for us to propel the faith generation to generation. So the written text then is something that comes from an oral tradition. The oral tradition then is written down. It's written down so that it does not get mongrelized. and then the oral tradition put into a text, it can be passed down to future generations. So we're the product of that. We have these Gospels 2,000 years old,
right,
and we're reading them, and we said, yeah, well, this is what they believed in the year 60, in the year 70, in the year 90, whatever the case may be. Now, with these Gospels, then, we also have the fact that they're the same insofar as the truth that they proclaim. The truth is all the same. Some of the events are the same, but they're written with a different angle. Each of the Gospels have a different angle. That's why we have 4. And there are times when people said, look, why don't we just make one? There was a guy named, he became known as a heretic, Marcion, and Marcion. And he said,
around what period was that?
Well, Marcion, I think he was in the 2nd century.
Okay.
And he said, why don't we just put them all together? We'll just meld all the Gospels together, and that way we'll just have one Gospel. The church said, no, we can't do that, because each of these Gospels has a different aspect to it, a different theological message that is important to passing on the faith. We'll talk about that shortly, about the different theologies involved in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The theologies are different. They're a special take that each evangelist has on the message of Jesus, on the message of the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Okay, so are these Gospels first-hand accounts? What do I mean by that? Do we have somebody there like Greg videotaping these Gospels? The answer is no. They're not videotaped, nor do we have a scribe there taking notes. They're talking about what they have heard, they're talking about what they have seen, and then the Christian community says, this is what we believe. This is what we believe about Jesus and the gospel. And then the evangelists, which are different from the apostles, they take their gospel from the witness of the apostles, but the apostles are not the writers of the gospel, perhaps with the exception of the beloved disciple John. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in his case, we'll talk about John, the beloved disciple, but then John the evangelist, who we believe is a different person, but who was instructed by the school of John. Okay. Don't get panicky, folks. I'm going to be able to put this all together for you. Okay? Now, when do we begin this genre? If you like the term genre, you're French, aren't you?
Yeah.
I'm saying it right? Genre. Genre.
Oui.
Okay. And the first one we have is the Gospel of Mark. We think it's the Gospel of Mark, the first one. Some go back as early as 55. Some say 65. Some say 70. I'm going to be safe and go right in the middle. I'd say between 60 and 65. And this gospel is written in Rome. And we think it is written because Mark was there in Rome with St. Peter. And Mark, the evangelist, received the teachings of his gospel from St. Peter himself. Now, what the scholars tell us about Mark's gospel is that Mark is basically what we call a passion narrative. Peter passed on the passion and death of the Lord. Remember, there's the passion of the Lord is vital to our faith, that he did undergo a passion because why? He was suffering and poured out his blood for our sins. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, he's vindicated in the resurrection. Many of Scripture scholars say this is a passion narrative. It's a passion narrative. And then the gospel is put into gospel form with a beginning, which is added on to the passion, which tells us about the public ministry of Jesus. And then at the end, it concludes with the message of the resurrection and the apostles going out to all the world telling the good news. So it's the passion, and then attached is the historical presence of Jesus, and then at the end we have the stories of the resurrection. Some believe that Mark being the first gospel, we're going to call it the proto-gospel, that it formed the basis for Matthew and Luke. Formed the basis for Matthew and Luke. So if Mark is the passion narrative, and it's very raw, this is a very raw gospel. It hits you with boom, boom, boom. It hits you with the facts right away. It's not beautiful. It's real.
Well, that's why I like it.
Yeah.
I told you, Mark is my favorite gospel.
And it's the
because
shortest, 16.
It's easy to understand.
Yeah, 16 chapters. And then at the end, we have the Markan inclusion. Mark was up to 16:8. At the end, we go down to 16, but 16 was added on later, and it's the story of the resurrection. And this is the story really of the resurrection because it ends at 8 with the empty tomb. And that's the faith. The tomb, there was an empty tomb, and the idea is that the Christian community knew that faith was not based on the empty tomb. Faith was based on the fact that they were gathering to celebrate the resurrection, that they would know the rest of the story. Later on, not too long afterwards, this part of the gospel between 9 and 16 was added on, which talked about the resurrection as the physical presence of Jesus, announcing himself and showing himself to the apostles. Fantastic piece of literature, but as I said, it's raw. It is a hard-hitting gospel. There's no frills. I wouldn't say the beautiful. It's the absolute truth, bare bones truths. Okay.
Yep.
Now, we have two other gospels that we believe base themselves on Mark.
Now, when you say that, Father, you're not saying based the content. You're saying the style.
The style.
Okay.
Style. Yeah, style. Because we're going to see now in the two other Gospels, Matthew and Luke, we're going to see a lot of the same information, maybe sometimes a different twist on it, but also presented in a way that the evangelist, Matthew and Luke, that they want to portray their specific theology about Jesus, who Jesus is and what he did. And it also is determined by the audience that they are preaching to. You know the old expression, you have to know your audience?
Sure.
Okay,
yeah.
So Matthew and Luke then, they decide that they're going to use Mark as a base. And we said the basis, of course, the death and resurrection of the Lord, the passion. And Matthew, we think, that Matthew was written around the year 85. Okay? Now, part of the question is where was it written and why did it take the form that it did? We believe that it was written in Antioch in Syria. In Antioch in Syria. Why? Because we call this the Jewish gospel. Why is it called the Jewish gospel? Because the congregation in Antioch, the people that were being preached to, there was a large Jewish population there. And that the evangelist, Matthew the evangelist, had to make his gospel understandable to the Jewish community that was there. Now, the community began as Jewish. They went to the synagogues and preached. They went to those who were proselytes, they'll call them. And there were people who maybe were not yet Christian, but they had an affinity toward Christ and the belief in the resurrection. Matthew then sees Jesus as the new Moses, leading people from sin and death and bringing them across the Jordan to new life, which he sees then as the resurrection, the fulfillment of all of God's promises. So you look at this gospel, and it's broken down into 5 parts, reminiscent of, or mimetic of, the 5 books of the Torah. Torah is the 5 books of the law in the Old Testament, where you have Genesis and Numbers and Deuteronomy and Leviticus. Now, one of the big tip-offs is this. Who gave the law in the Old Testament? Who's the lawgiver? Who gave the law? Moses, the lawgiver. And he gives it on Mount Sinai, correct? He gets the law, the 10 Commandments. Yep. New law now is given by Jesus where? On the Mount of the Beatitudes.
Oh, yes.
And you
the
get
Sermon on the Mount.
Yes, and you get the Beatitudes, so that Jesus is now very clearly being portrayed as the new Moses who is giving to the people the new law. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece of work. And all of a sudden, in people's minds, and if you're, schooled in Judaism, you're a Jewish community, there's a whole bunch of things that are going on in your head and saying, yeah, look, he's the fulfillment of everything that we had hoped for in the Old Testament. Let me be clear about this, folks. Unless you understand the Old Testament, you're not going to understand the New Testament. So I recommend reading the Old Testament and perhaps even getting some kind of a guide to help you. What I found to be years ago very, very helpful was something called, I don't think it's in print anymore, with the Jerome Biblical Commentary. Jerome Biblical Commentary, big, thick book. But it goes through Old Testament and New Testament with you to help you discern what's going on.
I know from experience we all need, at least I need help with the Old Testament. It's sometimes difficult to read. Let's take a break. We'll be right back after this. But for the moment, I'd like to talk to you about the expense of airing this program. Many people don't realize how expensive it is to produce this program and to get it on the air. Would you care to guess? It's about $3,000 per week. We think that's a reasonable expenditure, but obviously it's an expensive one. So we need to ask for your help. If you'll go to actionforlife.org and click on the donate button, it would be greatly appreciated. Now, you can donate once or you can donate each month, and we certainly have viewers who do both. We appreciate that. Please take time now to visit actionforlife.org and click on the donate button. Thank you so much for your support, and may God bless you always.
Ladies and gentlemen, we hear a lot today about society redistributing the goods of the people who work for those goods. We are called to work. Jesus was a worker himself. He was a carpenter. The apostles, they worked. They were fishermen. They never thought of themselves as being entitled to anything. As a matter of fact, St. Paul says, I'm a tent maker. I'm not going to impose on anybody. I'm going to work with my own hands. And a lot of people have forgotten that today. We are called to work, to use our natural gifts, to use our talents, to use our minds, and sometimes to use our backs to do the work that is going to provide a living for us and for our families. When we don't work, we diminish ourselves. There's no sense of satisfaction, accomplishment, no sense that we have put our time, our effort, and our sweat into providing for ourselves and for our families. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's think about what that means. It doesn't just simply mean taking a salary. It means providing for ourselves, providing for our families, and thanking Almighty God for all the good things He has given us, and asking us to co-create with Him with the goods of the earth, and to use our minds to make something wonderful for ourselves, for our family, and for our country.
Welcome back to A Conversation with Father Orsi. I'm BC Cloutier. We're talking about the writing of the Gospels today, which I find fascinating, Father. And every time we talk about things like this, I learn so much.
Yeah, it's just a fantastic thing to talk about how these Gospels were assembled. We talked about Mark and we talked about Matthew. Let's talk about Luke, and then we'll talk a little bit about John. Luke is a gospel that we believe was composed in the area we know today as, I suppose, Greece. And it's written around the, we think, between 70 and 75. So it's the second of the gospels written. Matthew is the third one. But this gospel is written by evidently somebody who Luke got the story from somebody else.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he then wrote the gospel. We can tell because Luke does not seem to be personally familiar with the Holy Land, with the geography, but he knows the story, he knows the message of Jesus, and he begins to write it down. We can also tell that Luke is a very highly educated man. And the gospel it's smooth. It's smooth. The Greek is perfect Greek. And he is a man who we believe was a physician. St. Paul called him great and glorious physician, or the physician Luke. So he's an educated man. He writes the gospel beautifully. And he has a technique that is absolutely fantastic. Read this gospel, folks. It is so beautiful because they say that Luke paints with words. And if you look at his gospel, you're going to see that he presents scenes in such a vivid way that you can actually picture what was going on. So let's just take a look at this. First of all, the two gospels have infancy narratives. It's Matthew and Luke have infancy narratives. The other two do not have infancy narratives. But you remember Luke's gospel, the scene of Jesus in the manger. You have the scenes of the angels. You have the scenes of the shepherds. Before the nativity of the Lord, you have the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel appearing to the Virgin Mary. And these paint pictures in our heads. These paint pictures in our heads. And that's why Luke is called also a painter. And some people who might be of Polish extraction, they claim that Luke painted the picture of Our Lady of Częstochowa, which is in Poland.
Okay.
Now, it's also known as the Black Madonna, but the Black Madonna got black because of all the candles that were lit in front of this painting. But that's how that's how the story goes, that he was a painter with words. So it's a beautiful gospel. You could look at each scene, and each scene is portrayed beautifully, and it is a way that is so vivid that it sticks in the reader's mind. So Luke, again, fantastic. It's smooth. The way he presents the story of Jesus is just magnificent, and it's something that sticks in our minds. And that's what he intended to do. And he has this gospel because he wants to portray this gospel as something that will be read by the community that he is writing for. And he has certain themes that go through it. He talks about, especially he's interested in the poor. He's interested in the disenfranchised. It comes right out at the beginning of the gospel with the shepherds. The shepherds were the dregs of society in those days.
Oh, no kidding.
Oh, the dregs of society. Nobody wanted to be bothered with those guys. And they show up in the infancy narratives. He's also a person who's interested in the rights of women. Women come out beautifully in his.
Wow.
Oh yeah, it's all right there. You know, from the Blessed Mother all the way through to the Mary of Magdala, to Mary and Martha. I mean, very, very concerned about women. And remember even the story of the woman that's going to be stoned. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said, whoa, hold it, guys. Who's without sin, throw the first stone. Okay, so that's also one of the big themes that you have in Luke's gospel. You're going to find these themes developed in the gospel. All right. But we could go on and on with what's in there. So, I mean, folks, read them. Read them. Don't just wait to go to church. Read the whole thing from beginning to end. Third is, fourth is the Gospel of St. John, John the Evangelist. It is the fourth gospel, and it is the last gospel written. It's written, we think, around the year 90. And it's different. The other three gospels, as I said, were based on Mark. We call them synoptics, and they look at the life and death and resurrection of the Lord through, we call it one eye, synoptic saying, synoptic, one eye. John is different. Although the truths are there and some of the stories are there are different stories that are added. But also with John, we have what we call a higher Christology. What do I mean by a higher Christology? The other Gospels are very much portraying Jesus in his humanity. John, although he portrays the humanity of Jesus, he also is very sure of portraying the divinity of Jesus, that Jesus is divine, that he is indeed the Son of God. So at the very beginning of the gospel, we have the prologue. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and everything was made through him. Right at the beginning of the gospel, so that you are sure to know that Jesus is indeed the Son of God, the second person of the Blessed Trinity. And in this gospel, Jesus is very much in command of everything. You see very little weakness on the part of Jesus, because John wants to be sure that we know that he is indeed the Son of God. I'll give you just an example. In the Garden of Gethsemane, that scene where the soldiers come in and they're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I am he, I am he. And all of a sudden, the soldiers fall back. Now, what is that a sign of? It's adoration, because the term is, I am. Who are you? I am. And that's the term that Jesus takes from Old Testament. What did God say to Moses when Moses wanted to know his name? I am. I am. And when Jesus says, I am, wow, that's the message. It means, I am. And you have the soldiers fall back, and they are seen as being giving worship and adoration to God. That's exactly the message that John wants to proclaim in that gospel. Also, you're going to find at the end of the gospel, the appearance stories, Jesus on the shore, the apostles see him from the boat, and you're going to find in that story where he's preparing breakfast for them. And, who is he? They can't even see him until they get there, and then they recognize him in the breaking of the bread. Now, he did appear, but there's also a message in that for us, and the message is this. When we go to Mass, we have the breaking of the bread. Jesus is the one who's saying the Mass. I am being used by Jesus as the priest. Jesus is the one that is providing the food, and then we are those who are attending the Mass, joining him in the Mass, but seeing him indeed as the Son of God, the one who provides food, the bread of life, which is also in John's Gospel, for his family. So go to that 6th chapter of John's Gospel. I am the bread of life. I am bread of life, Son of God, who nourishes us to help us to get to heaven.
Boy, we do about probably a dozen of these programs on the Gospels.
It's just fantastic.
But thank you for the enlightenment today, Father. Appreciate it. I hope you'll join us again next week for another episode of Conversation with Father Orsi. I'm BC Cloutier. Until next week, thanks so much for being here, and have a great week, and God bless.